This week's video is a little different. In August, I headed down to the New Jersey coast for a family vacation, and of course I brought my camera. Every time I come here, the coast feels different. The light, the birds, even the wind, it all changes day to day. And this time I had some help. My brother joined me, filming, spotting birds, and sharing those early mornings out on the sand. Unlike most of my videos, I didn't record any talking in the field, so this one's all told entirely through narration, a reflection on what we experienced and what I learned while photographing along the water's edge. Mornings shaped by calm sunrises, restless seas, and even a powerful hurricane pushing in from the Atlantic. And just a note before we start, this was actually the last trip I filmed using Nikon gear. Don't worry, I'm still fully switched over to OM system, but this one captures that final chapter. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and I hope you enjoy this one. We started before sunrise. The air was still, the tide was low, and the horizon painted in soft color, just for a few minutes before the clouds rolled in. The light faded fast, turning moody and gray. Low light and fast-moving birds are always a challenge. I found myself pushing ISO just to keep my shutter speed high enough to freeze any motion, which shorebirds move constantly. I like to photograph shorebirds from their level. Sometimes that means laying flat on the sand, with camera barely just off the ground. It's not always comfortable, you might get wet, but it's always worth it in the end. That low perspective turns the ordinary beach into a glowing backdrop, soft waves and distant light blending together behind the bird, creating nice background separation. It also helps the shorebirds feel more at ease when you're not towering above them. They often come surprisingly close, often within feet as they're foraging. August along the mid-Atlantic coast brings an amazing mix of species. Sanderlings, plovers, and various sandpipers that have just returned from their breeding grounds in the Arctic tundra. But one of the biggest surprises that morning was spotting a pair of American oystercatchers working the surf. I'd seen them before, but never this close, and I've never been able to get a decent photo of them. Their bright orange bills stood out even in the dim light, a beautiful contrast against the gray sky and the waves. One of the oystercatchers landed nearby, and I noticed it was missing a foot. It was still foraging confidently, but I kept my distance, letting it feed without interference. I didn't want my presence to cause any disturbance to the bird. Moments like this remind me that photographing wildlife isn't just about getting the shot. It's about respect for the wildlife as well. As the clouds thickened, I decided to experiment. Instead of chasing sharp action shots, I slowed my shutter speed to capture motion. The blur of the wings, the flow of the waves. Sometimes shifting your goal like that can open up creative results you never expected. The longer exposures turn the rough water into smooth, painterly streaks of white, almost abstract. I was able to get some interesting motion shots of the American oystercatchers as they were flying past me with the waves and their wing beats. Some shots that I'm pretty happy with. As the morning continued to stay dark, I shifted to doing some wave photography as well. Just something I never really experimented with. We ended our morning, uncertain of what the next few days would bring, and if this was going to be our only opportunity to be out, because there was a large hurricane churning offshore, which was expected to bring waves and strong winds. By the next morning, the sky was a solid gray. Even though the hurricane was still hundreds of miles offshore, the effects were clear. Strong winds, rough seas, and a beach covered in piles of sea foam. I wanted to include the foam in some of the shots. It added texture and told a story of what the ocean was doing. Sometimes small details like that really help to capture the mood and the place, and the effects of the environment on these animals. We found a small inlet at the southern edge of the beach, slightly sheltered by the dunes, and that's where most of the birds were. Sanderlings and plovers tucked behind bits of vegetation, gulls all facing into the wind, using their feathers' aerodynamics to conserve warmth. When birds are resting through storms, they're conserving every ounce of energy. The key here is patience. Moving slowly, or better yet, setting up where they're already headed, so they come to you. Every step can either bring them closer or push them away. I like to find a spot, stay low, and just let them forget that I'm there. In this protected section, there was a small tidal pool that formed between the dunes. A few sanderlings and black-bellied plovers were bathing in it, washing sand off their feathers between gusts. I crawled forward on my belly until I could frame them with a faint red buoy light in the background. It added a touch of color that the gray morning needed. Even shooting at ISO 8000, it was tough to freeze their motion. Sanderlings and plovers move really quickly when they're foraging along the high water mark. One trick I use is to wait until the bird pauses or moves predictably. I can then get away with the slower shutter speeds without losing sharpness. And when even that doesn't work, I switch gears entirely, using slow shutter speeds to blur the waves and create motion-filled images instead of fighting the conditions. The winds were really picking up, but the strong wind actually helped. Birds often take off into the headwind, moving slower, giving a rare chance to capture them midair, almost suspended as they're fighting the wind. Position yourself with your back to the wind, and you can anticipate these shots. That's something I love about wildlife photography. Even tough conditions can offer opportunities if you adapt to them and just watch and pay attention to what the animals are doing. Over the next few days, the storm continued to build, moving closer to the shore. Waves crashed higher with each tide, reaching the dunes and swallowing the beach completely. The sand whipped across our legs like tiny needles. Even in those conditions, the birds stayed, tucked low in the sand, holding their ground. Sometimes just watching how wildlife weathers a storm teaches you more than any book or tutorial ever could. On the final morning, we woke up unsure of what we were going to find, since the beach had been battered by the winds and the waves for the past 2 days. The storm had moved out to sea, visible now as a massive wall of clouds far on the horizon. It was really impressive to be able to see the entire width of the storm out as the sun rose behind it. The air was calmer, and the light was unbelievable. The rising sun broke through behind the hurricane and turned the waves into glowing pastels of pink, orange, and soft gold, reflecting off the foam and the sea spray still blowing off the tops of the waves. It was one of those moments you could just stand and take in before even needing to lift your camera. When I did start shooting, I focused on the way the light hit the spray, how the angle made it glow. I really wanted to try to capture that. For shots like that, I tried to experiment with different shutter speeds, fast to freeze the droplets in mid-air, and slower to let the spray streak and show motion. Each one tells a slightly different story and has different effects in the image. I launched the drone to take in the full scale of it. The ocean was still restless, but looked calm from above, the surface textured with foam from the days before. That perspective always amazes me, how peaceful something can look from above, even when you know how chaotic it was just a few days ago. The birds had begun to return to their usual rhythm, moving along the shoreline again, feeding between waves, and running along the beach. It was a fitting end, the storm behind, and life was returning to normal. Even though the weather wasn't ideal, those few days on the coast reminded me why I love this kind of photography. You can't control the conditions, but you can work with them. Sometimes the best images come when you stop fighting the weather and start listening to it and paying attention. Photographing shorebirds in rough conditions taught me patience and how to look for beauty in the moments between calm and chaos. It also reminded me that the experience, the time spent out there with my brother, watching these birds endure the same storm we did, it's what makes these trips special. Hope you enjoyed coming along for this one. And if you did, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a comment, or share your own experiences photographing wildlife in unpredictable weather. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.